Hello everyone. In this tutorial, I will show you how to do cluster analysis using k-means clustering. Before you start your cluster analysis, make sure that you know your data, you know what variables you have, and so that you should familiarize with your data set and the variables and of course the purpose of your cluster analysis. So in this video, I'm just going to show you the steps involved using k-means cluster analysis using SPSS software. So what we have right now, as you see, is a data set. It's about the telecommunication provider, and we want to segment the customers based upon their usage. So I'm quickly looking here at the data set, and I have a bunch of variables here in this data set, and one of the important step for the cluster analysis is to know what variables you want to use for your cluster analysis. So therefore, before you start your cluster analysis, make sure that what variable you have and what variable you want to work to do on the cluster analysis. So there are a few variables, such as this is a long distance, and this is the toll free, this is the equipment, this is the calling card. So what we have is 5 variables. They're continuous variables, okay, and I'm going to use this 5 continuous variable to do clustering of this telecommunication customers. Okay, so I'm using a continuous variable. Now it's very common when you have many variables, and it's also possible that the unit of variables may be different. So before we do cluster analysis, we generally standardize these variables so that every variable have a mean of 0 and standard deviation of 1, and which allows for different units which variables are measured will have the same units, like standardized variable, the z-score. So before I go on doing that, I'm going to show you how to see them here, how to convert them into a z-score. So this variable I just mentioned, and these are the variables 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 variables. So these 5 variables are continuous variables, okay, and you can see that in this variable view, a lot of these variables are categorical variables. So this variable will be useful when we do profiling, for example, or a bunch of other variables. So we're going to use this these 5 variables: long distance last month, toll free last month, equipment, calling card last month, and the wireless last month, and these are the variable names. All right, so how you do that is this: go on analyze and click on the descriptive statistics and click on the descriptives, and we're going to select those 6 variables, the 5 variables we just identify, and I'm just going to look at the variable name here, and I'm going to make sure that I'm select the right variables. So the first variable is this long distance last month, and the last one is a wireless last month. So this is the wireless last month. Okay, so these are 5 variables: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 variables. Yes, 5 variables, and they are in a continuous scale. And I'm going to click here. It's called save standardized values as variables. So I clicked check them here, and you don't have to do anything, but I can show you what it look like. Just is right now when I run this thing, it's going to be descriptive stats. So just showing what have descriptive stats, you're going to see that. So yeah, so you can always check on the descriptive stats. So this way you see what the data variable look like. So yes, it's a good idea to also check some descriptive stats of this variable before you run your analysis. Okay, so I'm just going to say okay, and so I ran okay, and you can see that this is the student descriptive stats. So we have this 5 variables we identify. They are continuous variable, and we're going to use this variable to do our clustering. Okay, and so yeah, you can see that these are the values. So these are the mean value of these variables. It doesn't give the unit, but I'm assuming that these are dollar values, and these are standard deviations. and yeah, so this is the kurtosis, and this is skewness, so seems to be slightly skewed. All numbers are positive. So I'm just going to close this window here. I can close this thing, and I'm going to show you is what new variables we have. So if you scroll down to your data set and you see this, we have now five z-score variables. So these scores, as I mentioned earlier, these are our standardized variables. So we got 5 standardized variables. So we're going to use these variables to do our k-mean cluster analysis. So how I'm going to do that? So watch the steps. So as I said, it's very important that you know your data set, and before you do cluster analysis, make sure that you identify your variables, and so that you can proceed. So this is very important. And normally people who do this practice, they know exactly what variable they want to use, because in the end you have to tell a story. You have to make the reason why these variables are interesting and useful. Okay. So I'm going to go and analyze here. Select the analyze here and click on the classify, and when you click on the classify, you see a lot of options showing up. So here I'm going to select the k-mean clusters. Okay, so analyze, classify, k-mean cluster. I click there in k-mean cluster. So the default number of clusters are 2. I'm going to change this cluster to 3. And again, how many clusters you define, there's no right wrong answer. Normally the people who do this this analysis, they generally go, perhaps you can start with 2 cluster, 3 cluster, 4 cluster, 5 cluster, and then you decide how many clusters are more optimum. Basically you want to make sure that each clusters are very distinct from each other, and they have very interesting story. So generally speaking, you cannot simply just run at one time. Really, you have to run many times until you say, okay, this is optimum number of cluster, which makes sense. And also another important thing is, when you're doing cluster analysis, make sure that each clusters have enough people or enough group of customers, so that the clusters are meaningful as well. So you can't just have one cluster with like 10 people or 5 people. You need to make sure there is enough people, so that you can be able to make a proper campaign to reach out to those customers in terms of serving them. Okay, so we're going to select those z-score variables. Okay, so they are the same variable, but now they are standardized scores in the z-scores. Okay, yeah, and I will not check all these cluster centers, etc. So as I change the number of cluster to 3, and click on the iterate. So by default, number of iteration is 10. So we want to make sure that that we set a maximum number of iteration, for example, so that we have a convergence. So so I'm going to change my maximum number of iteration from 10 to 35, so that I have a maximum number of iteration. And it's a conversion criteria. I'm going to leave it 0 as it is. And it's asking, do you want to use use running means? And I'm not going to check this running mean. I'm just going to leave them as it is. But if you check this this box, then cluster center will be updated after each case is classified. And so I'm just going to leave them as it is, and continue. And one more thing is this is the save. So basically, once the clusters are formed, you can save them as a cluster membership. So we're going to have a new variable which will have a cluster memberships. I'm not going to save the distance from cluster, because unless you have planned to use them, but most time we really don't use them. So I'm just going to, but this is very important. This cluster membership is tell you how many clusters we have and what the numbers are. So because we have 3 clusters, so it will be like 1, 2, 3, so 3 clusters. Okay, so it will show, it will save the membership for each of the customers, which group these customers belong to. Okay, so I will continue, and on the option button, I'm going to see the initial cluster standards. You can see that what initial cluster standard look like. I'm going to check on our table, and also cluster information for each cases. Okay, and here it is there's missing values here, list wise, pair wise. If you leave the list wise as it is, then it will exclude any cases which has missing values. but I'm going to check on the pairwise. The advantage of the pairwise is because as you can imagine in this particular example, telecommunication, because not all customers uses all the services. And then in this case, the pairwise maximize the information. In other words, it doesn't delete, so it's use what variable already available. And I'm going to say okay. So I say okay, and now it's running cluster analysis. K-mean cluster is run very quickly, so this is great. So what we have is some of the initial answers. So it's showing you the Z scores by each cluster, showing you what's the Z score look like for initial cluster centers. We don't really use this information for interpretation, but it's good to see them. And this is the iteration, so you can see that it converges at 33 iterations. A good thing we have leave it for 35, so we allow them that we have full convergence. And cluster memberships, so it's showing you how each of those cases, the data set we have, which this case number belong to which cluster. As you can see, that case number 1 belong to cluster number 1, and of course it will be very long list. It will show for all the cases we have in our data set. So in this data set we have I believe over, I think it's a 1,000, yeah, it's a 1,000 customers. So it will show you the case for each customer. So again, this is just a quick look at it, but this is interesting. This showing my final cluster centers, so how each cluster center look like. So this is interesting and useful information to see that. And this is also very interesting. It's kind of show you that what's the distance between from one cluster to another cluster. So we have 3 clusters. It's showing you the distance between cluster 1. So it's showing the cluster 1 distance is from cluster 1 and 2 is 3.0. So of course you can see that cluster 1 are the more distance apart, and cluster 3 is second most distance apart. So in other words, cluster 1 and 2 are very apart, whereas cluster 2 is also very apart. As you can see that we already saw in the cluster 1, and then cluster 3 is more apart to cluster 2, for example. So it's kind of showing you that how far these clusters are. And of course, when you're doing this K-mean clustering, you don't want to see that these clusters are as apart as possible. This is an ANOVA table of this 5 variable you use. So, and you can see that all these 5 variables, all significance values are less than 0. It's basically kind of giving you a hint that all the variables you use, they're significant in cluster analysis, and therefore that each variables has a very distinct characteristics for each of the clusters we have identified here. So we have 3 clusters. So this is very interesting. So in this, because we have 1,000 people, and out of 1,000 people, we have almost more than 50% cluster people are in cluster 1. So it's not unusual when you see one cluster has more people, because most customers generally behave similar way. And then we have this cluster 2, which has a 19% of the customer, 191, and the smallest clusters, of course, between the 3. And then cluster 3 has a 23.3% customers. So it's kind of giving the how many cases are in each cluster. So this is our cluster analysis. And if you go back and look at the data set, and you see that we have this cluster membership showing up in the end. So here it is, number of clusters in case. So here is this is a quick cluster ran, right? So if you look at this one, this is the cluster shows up. So now what we have done is we have done this K-mean cluster analysis, and so basically in terms of segmenting, so we have done this segmenting. Of course, as you can see that this all 1 and 2 and 3 doesn't really tell us a lot unless we do profiling, so that we can understand better. In my next tutorial, I'm going to show you how to do a profiling. So once you're satisfied with this cluster analysis, make sure you save your work. So I'm going to save my work so I won't lose it. And yeah, so I'm going to make another video for you. I'm going to show you so what's to do next after the cluster, after you have made your clusters.